Hello, my name is Nikki Armstrong and I am your instructor for the Summer 2015 online public speaking class. This is the first lecture presentation of the public speaking class, and it is based off of Chapter 1 in the DK Guide to Public Speaking. Throughout this lecture, it will just cover the most important aspects of Chapter 1 and give you the chance to hopefully gain a little more information outside of strictly reading the text. You will use these lectures and PowerPoint presentation to aid in developing your public speaking skills as well as completing the required quizzes for each chapter and each section and each tab in the textbook and class. So the very first lecture presentation is on Chapter 1, which is part of the first tab, which is blue, in the public speaking textbook. This chapter overall is about the whole point of taking this class, the whole point of becoming a strong public speaker, what we are hoping you will get from the class, and what I am hoping will help you understand the basic ideas and premises of the class. So the chapter starts off with talking about how this will help you in your real life, in your life outside of the classroom. So it will improve your ability to speak about issues in your community. It will help you become more culturally sensitive. It'll help you become better at being an audience member and analyzing other people's speeches. It will help aid you in your professional life, because most of the careers out there do require some aspect of public speaking at some point in time, and it will actually improve your personal life in helping you organize your thoughts better and become a more able body to express your points of views and your opinions. The chapter goes on to talk about the communication process, which is the most basic idea of what public speaking or what communication is. So it talks about how there's this entire circle of things that happen when a speech or a communication occurs. So it starts with the speaker encoding, so creating a message and sending it through a channel to the receiver. Once the receiver receives the message, they will then decode it and provide some sort of feedback. And so when they decode it, they'll send it back through the channel to the speaker, and they will then at that point in time decode the feedback that the receiver of the message sent. Another term for receiver would be an audience member. Something that happens all the time that will affect the ability to understand a message is something called noise. The book talks very briefly about noise being both environmental, which is noises that happen in the physical realm, so things like a loud fan or somebody coughing or somebody moving their chair or tapping their pencil, anything that you could interpret and could distract you from the message that's being sent. The other type of noise that happens quite a bit is something I call internal noise. So internal noise are things that you are thinking about on your own that distract you from the message being read or being sent. So for example, if you're concerned about the exam coming up, if you're concerned about something else that needs to be going on, or if you're creating your response to the message that you are receiving, anytime you are not actively listening to what the speaker is sending, noise, specifically internal noise, is happening. Other things that can also affect the ability for the message that the speaker is sending to be properly received by the audience are the situation, so the surroundings that you are in, each person's background. So if you have a very different background than the speaker, then the speaker's message is going to be received differently than somebody who has a similar background to the speaker. So if you are able to find a common ground a lot of times, that will help the message be received more accurately, or at least what the speaker is trying to be conveyed will be received in the way that they want it to. All of this is part of what I call the transaction process, and so there are several steps that will take place in the transactional process to help ensure that the speaker's message is properly received by the audience. The next part of the book, the next part of the chapter that is covered is talking about what you can do to be the best public speaker you can be. So the first thing it talks about is being audience-centered, which is incredibly important, because if you don't take the audience's ideas or the audience's information into consideration, it's going to make it very difficult to craft a speech that the audience wants to hear and can understand. So if you are an auto mechanic and you're giving a speech to other auto mechanics, it's more likely what you are trying to talk about is going to be understood by the audience as they're listening to you. Versus being an auto mechanic giving a speech to somebody who doesn't even know how to put the key into the ignition. If you start talking about the inner workings of a motor, they're not going to understand that. So keeping the audience in mind and coming up with topics that the audience will be interested in and invested in will help you become a more successful speaker. The next thing is being knowledgeable, creative, and organized in your writing and presenting of your speech. So if you choose a topic that you don't know anything about, there's a high likelihood that you might misunderstand information or give information that isn't completely correct. So while you don't have to be an expert before you pick a speech topic, before you give the speech, you should become as familiar with that topic as you can. Then the next two things, which are equally important, you need to be creative. So you need to have a new approach to the topic, or the new approach to the speech, because we've all heard speeches about certain things over and over and over again. So if you don't bring a new creative spin to the topic, then the audience is more likely to get bored. And the speech must be organized. If it's not organized, then the audience won't be able to follow what you're saying, and that will be equally confusing to the audience. The next thing is something that's super important, especially when you get to the persuasive type of speech, and that is appealing to the different types of Aristotle argumentation methods. So the first one is logos, which is appealing to the logic of the audience. So that's where a lot of statistics and things along those lines come in. Then you have ethos, which is appealing to the emotions of the audience. That's where a lot of stories or a lot of intense emotions or graphic pictures, those kinds of things that will evoke an emotional response from the audience. That's how you would appeal to them using ethos. I apologize, I completely misspoke there. Pathos. Pathos is the appeal to emotions. Pathos is the appeal to emotions. And so that is using the different type of emotional grasps or things that audiences are emotionally invested in. Love stories, death, graphic pictures, sad stories. Those types of things appeal to people on an emotional level. And so that is using pathos. And then lastly, we have ethos. And ethos is the appeal to credibility. So what that means is that if you can establish yourself as a credible person to be presenting on this topic, the audience is more likely to want to listen to you. So if you bring in somebody who is a specialist in forensics to talk about the fingerprints that were found on this glass stem, they're more likely to be believed than if it was somebody who just, for a hobby, picked up a fingerprinting kit one time. Well, they both have some knowledge about it. One person has that credibility, has that background, has that expertise, which makes them more reliable. And that is what ethos is about. The last two things that this section of the chapter talk about in order to help you become a successful public speaker is to use appropriate presentational techniques. So that is things that are going to just help you make sure that you are using the proper dialogue and the proper visual aids and the proper gestures, and that you have the proper appearance. And all of these things are going to help you become a more successful speaker, because it's going to portray that you have a right, or that you should be talking about whatever you're talking about. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is the importance of practicing your speech again and again and again. And taking that a step further than what the chapter talked about, it's also important that you practice your speech out loud and in front of other people. That way you can get used to how it feels to be in front of people giving a speech versus just practicing it in your head, which is a totally different situation. The book then goes on to talk about something that we will be covering extensively throughout the entire course. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it right at this instance, but it gives you some tips for overcoming your fear of public speaking, which is a very real fear that a lot of people have. But some tips that the book have is to understand what is happening, to put words to the fears, figure out why you are truly afraid of public speaking. Then once you have all of that, to face your fear head on. So I always say the more you give speeches, the less scary they become and the less fear you have. To recognize what your anxiety-inducing symptoms are, and then to practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the more comfortable you will feel. The book then goes on to talk about how to be an ethical speaker, which is incredibly important, but something I feel like we have all talked about quite a bit on our own. So I'm going to leave you to look through all of those things for yourself, and if you have any questions, make sure that you bring them to my attention. The only one I want to touch on for just a few seconds here is the importance of citing your sources. So anytime you get information that is not from your own brain, you have to both verbally cite in your speech where the information came from, as well as have a works cited page, and we'll be going into more details there. And avoid plagiarism. If there's any plagiarism going on, you will not receive a grade for that assignment. The last bit of the chapter does talk about how to use the book to create a speech, the different steps that we'll be going through. I'm not going to cover those now because they will be covered in their individual chapters. This does end the first lecture of the first chapter of Tab 1. The next one uploaded will be for Chapter 2, which is the importance of getting to know your audience. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Otherwise, happy studying.